9250. Broadcasting live from Studio One high atop the WVOX tower. This is Westchester's only locally owned and operated community station for you and yours for more than 50 years. 1460 WVOX.
WVOX.
Welcome to Slow Medicine Radio. Our host is integrative medicine Dr. Michael Finkelstein. Michael offers medical advice from a holistic paradigm, including both medical and metaphysical philosophies from the full spectrum of human experience. Slow Medicine Radio offers fresh ideas on how to attain a state of wellness that seems distant given the limitations of today's medical paradigm. It introduces you to thought leaders who connect the dots between theory and practice, examining health from a broad perspective with regards to medical diagnoses, conventional and alternative therapies, healthcare policy, and related topics that warrant further thought and discussion. Slow Medicine Radio does not prescribe to take this or do that. Instead, it offers an open-minded, intelligent, and practical approach to living, resulting in greater health individually and collectively. Here is Dr. Michael Finkelstein, the founder of Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York.
Well, welcome to Slow Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Finkelstein, and we're here every Monday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time on 1460 WVOX and worldwide at WVOX.com. Mission of this program, once again, is to talk to you about health, help you achieve a state of health that perhaps your doctors can only talk to you in theory, but there's a practice that we need to acquire, develop, and there's some people out there, like our guest today, who can help us understand actually how we approach that. My guest is Lissa Rankin, a physician, New York Times bestselling author of several books, Mind Over Medicine, The Fear Cure, and the most recent, The Anatomy of a Calling. She's a speaker and founder of the Whole Health Medicine Institute, and she's a mystic. She, I know, is passionate about what makes people optimally healthy and what predisposes them to illness. Personally and professionally, she's on a mission to merge science and spirituality that not only facilitates health for the individual, but, as I describe, also helps us as a collective. Sometimes we think of these worlds, science and spirituality, as very disparate areas, but Lissa, in her work, is a collaborator and amplifies broadcasts and shares her vision for a world that will help us achieve this state of health and healing. Often, her latest research talks about it as sacred medicine. So, Dr. Rankin, Lissa, thank you very much for joining me today on Slow Medicine Radio.
Oh, hi, it's Lissa. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, rumor has it that my mother wanted to name me Lisa, but wasn't allowed because of Dirty Lisa on her soap opera. So Lissa was the compromise.
and I apologize, because I was wondering, because your name is spelled Lissa, and sort of suggests that there's something otherwise unique about that. And, of course, you are as well.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So, in my introduction of you and your introduction of yourself, as I've read much of your work, we share something in common, which is we went to medical school, and while I think you might say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that there was a lot you learned there, but there was also a lot that you didn't learn, or that you recognize was limited about the Western medical paradigm. And in your most recent work, which I'm reading, The Anatomy of a Calling, you share your experience as a young resident. And to some extent, the problem with a lack of humanity, both in the development of the physician and the way physicians are taught to treat their patients. And maybe we can start there and tell me a little bit, and the people who are listening, about your personal story so we can understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, well, I think so many people who go to medical school, we go because of our love of humanity, of that sort of natural impulse to serve, to heal, and to, be with the suffering of other people when they're at their most vulnerable. And it's a really precious, thing to have the opportunity to have a front row seat on life and death, to kind of be there at those moments when life first comes into the world and when life leaves the world. And I always saw that as very sacred. And it was a very natural thing for me, like it is for many doctors. My spiritual mentor is Rachel Naomi Remen, who's a 78-year-old doctor who created a program called The Healer's Art that's taught in, over 70 medical schools in 9 countries in the world. and wrote a book called Kitchen Table Wisdom. So I've been really influenced by Rachel and the way that she has approached healing. And it's a very, one of the things that she teaches when she works with doctors is that most of us were the kinds of kids that would run out into the, mud puddles after a rain and try to save the earthworms, And for me, it was baby squirrels. I was 7 years old when I had this incredible uprising of this love and compassion for this nest of 4 baby squirrels that my parents found in a chimney. And most doctors, if you actually dive into their story, they were those kind of kids. They weren't the kids that, beat up the animals or hurt other children. They were the ones who stood up against the bullies, or the ones that were kind of trying to save the animals when they were little. And that natural impulse that you said is that piece of humanity, that love of life, of the life force itself, and that impulse to serve the life force is very natural for most doctors. But the training itself, for 12 years of training for me, it depends on your specialty, it's extremely traumatizing, especially if you're very feminine like I was. And I think that feminine principle in medicine has been very, very discouraged and discriminated against. That impulse of compassion, of touch, of nurturing, collaboration, of that ability to really have that level of empathy. And I was shamed for that in my medical education. And if you read The Anatomy of Calling, you know the book begins with a story where I had to deliver 4 dead babies in one night. And in between those dead babies, I had to go and deliver live babies. And it was just this back and forth kind of emotional wreck for me. Yeah. And the story that I won't get into because it takes a while to tell it, but the story ends with me kind of running down the hallway at 4 o'clock in the morning with my male professor screaming at me because I'm crying because I just found out that the 4th baby died. And I'm crying, and my teacher is yelling, buck up, Rankin, you're never going to amount to anything in this business if you don't get a thicker skin. And these 2 midwives are running after me because he's chasing me into the women's locker room, and they're trying to block the door to protect me. And I'm, curled up in a heap on the floor of the women's locker room while my teacher is screaming at me from the door. And these 2 midwives locked the door, and they came down, and they crawled on the floor with me, and they held me in their arms. I'll never forget this moment. It was such a blessing. And they held me and rocked me like 2 mothers while I cried. And one of them said, "Don't ever let them break you."
Well, we have spoken already because you've written about it, sacred medicine, about how sacred that is, this initiation that you experienced so early in your career. And while it was painful, obviously, and while it reflected the frailty of human life, the fact that these babies died in front of you, was somehow launching you into the work that you are now doing. I always take stories like this, and while I feel the pain, and for that reason I just want to extend my heart to you in the moment. Just recalling it must send shivers down your spine because I've seen it too in my own work. I've actually, I have to admit, perpetrated some of that as a teacher in medicine in this very male-dominated culture. Probably was an abuser too in some way, which I now feel shame for. But yet I see the growth that is taking place by virtue of conversations like this that are allowing people to re-envision the practice and the art of medicine and restoring humanity, and then connecting all the dots between the practice of medicine and the way that we're living our lives on this planet.
Well, we were all perpetrators. I was too. I mean, I also tell the story in The Anatomy of a Calling of the moment when I had been up for 36 hours and delivered 20 babies or something, and I had just gotten off call, and I was standing in line at the grocery store and trying to get my, this teenage kid is trying to swipe my yogurt, and the only thing that's standing between me and my well-earned bed is this teenager who can't figure out how to make the swiping machine work. And I remember staring him in the eye and saying, if I did my job the way you did your job, there'd be dead people everywhere.
Yeah, right.
And then I was like, oh, my God, I've become that person. I've become that person that I always swore I'd never be. And, I saw it as this is them breaking me, right? Mm-hmm. This is me getting broken. And I wound up leaving my job in medicine because I was so traumatized and I was so unwilling to become that person, but I didn't know how to get out of it. And the whole story was a very desperate and humble and vulnerable experience of realizing that I couldn't handle it, you could say. I couldn't handle it. Like, my integrity, my soul would not let me continue to see 40 patients a day and deliver 20 babies in a night and keep kind of soldiering on, armoring my heart over and over in order to survive. And so I had to leave in order to come back home and to reclaim my role in medicine in the same way that you have, where sometimes it takes that. Like, we have to recognize, oh, yeah, I've become the victim. I approached it as this sort of savior complex. I've become the victim, and now I'm the perpetrator. And any of us who are familiar with that drama triangle know that if you're any one of those roles, you're at some point in your life going to be all three. And I just decided to exit the triangle and try to actually come back to, like, what does it really mean to heal, not just heal others, but heal myself, so I can show up as a whole human being with another suffering being that I don't see as broken, but as whole.
Well, I have to say, it takes tremendous courage then to have gone through what you did and be able to face yourself in the mirror, to see the reflection that not only, your vulnerability, but then how we have been in our profession, but how, in general, people are influenced by the culture around them. And we're really at a crossroads. Again, your voice is so important now for this shape-shifting of our path as a species on this planet. I just want to get back to your comment about what does it take for us to heal, and maybe take a pause here to go to a break and let those who are listening think for their moment, maybe set their own intention about healing. Because while we can look at this as our own individual quest, we may have ailments that we want to deal with. I think that there's something very important about combining that interest that we have as individuals and then support each other so that collectively we also get there. I'm talking to Lissa Rankin, physician, quite inspiring. Just pause with us for a moment, take the minute, reflect, and we'll be back.
You're listening to Slow Medicine Radio. You can find out more about the show and the work of Dr. Michael Finkelstein by visiting his website, slowmedicinedoctor.com. Slow Medicine Radio is sponsored by the Slow Medicine Foundation, dedicated to providing community-centered, experiential, and reflective learning for individuals, families, and groups, offering educational programs, events, and resources, as well as insightful health evaluations with customized medical guidance. Dr. Finkelstein works with his wife, Robin Queen Finkelstein, at their farm, Sunraven, in Bedford, New York, and they invite you to visit and take advantage of this unique resource, including men's and women's groups and couples programs. If you think about it, much of what we experience when we don't feel well is a result of the fast world and how it affects us. Therefore, if fast is the disease, then slow is the medicine. Visit Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York. Go to slowmedicinedoctor.com or call 914-218-3113. And thank you for tuning in Mondays at 5 p.m. right here on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to Slow Medicine Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Finkelstein, and I'm speaking with Dr. Lissa Rankin, who's written several books, Mind Over Medicine, The Fear Cure, and The Anatomy of a Calling. And we've been talking about her story a little bit, about going through medical training and recognizing that something a little off with that. And Lissa, you've asked the question, which I'd like you to answer, which is, what does it mean to heal? And I'm wondering how you define healing and where you think we are right now, and what advice would you give those who are listening?
Well, I think there are many answers to that question, and if anybody's, for those who are listening, I think I always like to turn that question back upon the patient. And I think of healing as a toolbox. We've got tools in our toolbox, so I never want to diminish what they taught us in medical school. Like, the example that I love to use is my ex-husband cut 2 fingers off his left hand with a table saw. And, thank God for Dr. Jones, who spent 10 hours in surgery, microsurgery, performing the miracle of replantation surgery so that Matt has 10 fingers today. That is its own kind of sacred medicine. That is a miracle of technology. And so that's one of the tools in our toolbox. But I think that those tools are great for trauma care, for emergency care. But I don't think we do chronic illness very well in the Western medical model. So when I'm looking at people that have failed those emergency care things, or who have maximized what Western medicine has to offer, and they're still really plagued with symptoms, or maybe even the medical treatment has harmed them, and they're now dealing with, we now know from the data that the number 3 cause of death in this country is preventable medical error. So that pains me deeply because, upon graduating from medical school, the first thing we did was take a thousands of years old oath that said, first do no harm. So I think part of healing is first do no harm. And then I think this, there's a perspective shift that's possible if people are open for it, and not everybody is ready for this. Mm-hmm. But this is for the people that have tried other things and they're frustrated and they're really willing to enter the crucible of the healing process. And for those people, there's an opportunity for illness to be a portal to awakening, where the illness itself, some people quit their job and they move to India and they work with a spiritual teacher for 10 years, and they know it's going to be hard, but they're willing to do it for the spiritual growth. And for some people, their illness is actually, they don't go to India to work with a guru, the illness becomes the guru. Yep. Where if we're willing to let the healing journey actually be that growth process, where we're willing to enter into the healing journey with curiosity and humility, and being really careful not to shame yourself, and to be really gentle and compassionate with yourself, but to open yourself to questions like, what is my body saying no to? Or what does my body really need in order to heal? And when I'm working with people and I ask those questions, people are amazed how quickly they know the answer. Like there's a wise, intuitive, soulful part of all of us that knows the answer to what is my body saying no to. And it's often not the things that other people are expecting. Like, so often we're hoping, okay, I can take this pill or maybe this supplement instead, or maybe it's going to be my raw foods diet, or I'm going to work out with this personal trainer, or maybe I need to meditate, or it's yoga. But often when I ask that question, people have to come face to face with some really uncomfortable things like, oh my goodness, I need to leave my toxic marriage, or I need to quit this soul-sucking job, or I need to finally pursue this dream that's been like, a yearning in my heart my whole life, and it's time to finally go to art school, or I need to move to Santa Fe. Like these are some of real-life answers that my patients have given me. And some of those people, when they've actually been brave enough to take action on those intuitive impulses, have had spontaneous remissions from seemingly incurable illnesses. And it's, in the beginning, I didn't understand at all what was happening to these patients. I was just talking to them and asking good questions. Right. And these illnesses that they had, the best of Western medical care, plus they'd seen their naturopath and they were on their raw foods diet and they were working out every day. And they were taking 20 supplements, and all they did was make a life change that was based on that intuitive impulse, and all their symptoms go away. And this doesn't happen all the time, right? This isn't a guarantee that if you do that brave thing and take that leap of faith based on that inner knowing of aligning your life with your truth, that all your symptoms are going to go away. It's not that simple. But it's an opportunity for inquiry that I think can open up a portal. And I've seen miraculous things happen, not just in people's health, but in their happiness, in their capacity for joy, and in their capacity for grief, and their really stepping into that full human experience. And that, to me, is what healing is all about.
Beautiful answer, and something that I've shared, too. I liken a lot of the things that people do, like the supplements and the diets and the activities and exercise and meditation, as seeds. They get put into soil. And the soil is cultivated by their connection to truth, to the warm, moist environment, which can be cultivated. But if the soil isn't worked, then the seeds, as good as they may be, will not grow. And so this is often how, when I use that phrase, connecting dots, I really mean people finding that alignment so that they could really nourish their soil first, their true heart and passion, purpose for life, our collective humanity, our consciousness, our greater awareness, and then use those same seeds. But then I think they have a better chance of growing.
Right. Well, and let me just give your listeners a frame for this. This is overly simplistic. I think especially with my research, working with some shamans and energy healers, and for a future book that I'm going to write called Sacred Medicine, it's not this simplistic, but it's a helpful frame that when I realized, and nobody quite taught me this in medical school, when I realized that the body is naturally equipped with really brilliant self-healing mechanisms. Like we all make cancer cells every day, and we're exposed to bacteria and viruses and fungi, and we have natural anti-aging mechanisms built in. But the activity of those self-healing mechanisms is completely dependent on the state of the nervous system. So when the nervous system is in the fight or flight, sympathetic stress response, then all of those self-healing mechanisms get turned off because the body is in emergency mode. It says, this is not a good time to do homeostatic self-care, disease prevention, because we got to run away from a tiger. But when the nervous system is in the parasympathetic nervous system, or what Herbert Benson at Harvard called the relaxation response, then those self-healing mechanisms get turned on. They get activated, and sometimes in really extreme ways. And I think that's what the placebo effect is really related to. It's related, the placebo as we know it, I define it as a combination of nurturing care and positive belief. And when we believe that this sugar pill is going to help us and it's offered to us with love, then the nervous system relaxes and those self-healing mechanisms can activate. So we know that the placebo effect can be effective 18 to 80% of the time. But we don't have to take a sugar pill in order to activate that effect. So the way I think of a lot of the healing process is anything that we can do that can shift the nervous system from stress response to relaxation response is going to tend that soil that you're talking about. So whether that means, doing something proactive that will take you into relaxation response, like meditation, but that's only a Band-Aid. Like you can't meditate 24 hours a day. Well, I mean, you could technically, according to my spiritual counselor, but as long as you still have these really toxic things happening in your life, it's going to continue to activate the stress response. So part of that tending the soil is to just recognize what are the things in my life that are activating those stress responses, because most Americans are in stress response over 50 times a day, and every time we are, those natural self-healing mechanisms get deactivated. So that's, like I said, that's overly simplistic, and I talk about it in great detail in my book, Mind Over Medicine. All the science behind that, it's not just a concept, that it's actual real grounded science. But I think when we do that work, when we're actually willing to adjust our lives so that our lives are in alignment with the truth of what our soul knows we're here for, then the nervous system starts to relax and miraculous things can happen. I call it making your body ripe for miracles.
That's great, and thank you very much, because you've just did a great synopsis of slow medicine as well, which is what I talk about in terms of the fast world, how it stimulates our sympathetic nervous system. So I have a question. We only have a minute or two left, and this is a conversation we could obviously extend. But in that minute, you talked about the fact that many people aren't necessarily ready to step into the crucible, where some of this rawness, this honesty, and this life-changing potential, occurs. So for people who are resistant, which of course are many, and they may need their time, and there's no reason necessarily to push them, but people maybe who are on the fence, what do you say to them? How do you help them maybe take the first step in this direction?
Well, I say two things. So my teacher, Rachel Naomi Remen, says you can't force a rosebud to blossom by beating it with a hammer. And that starts with yourself. You can't force yourself to be ready to enter the crucible if you're not ready, and that's okay. So a lot of self-compassion is necessary. But what I tell my clients is that the first step is just to make peace with what's true. That's it. That's your only job. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to take action. You don't have to even tell anybody. But if you ask yourself, what does my body need in order to heal, or what is my body saying no to, and you get an answer that's really confronting, just be with that. It may take you a year or two. Like when I was taking 7 medications for a whole host of chronic health conditions, and that when I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to quit my job, and my husband didn't work, I had a newborn, like I was the sole breadwinner. I was like, I can't do that. That's impossible. It took me 2 years to make peace with what was true before I could actually start to do something about it, and that's okay. So it's really quite simple. but it's a huge thing to make peace with what's true. So stop being in denial with yourself. Be really loving with yourself. Start there. That's the really loving, gentle entry into the container of the crucible without actually going down the rabbit hole. And it's okay if you're never ready. We're all entitled to our own journey.
Beautiful words. How can people reach you?
Oh, my website is my name, lissarankin.com, LISSARANKIN, and I have a public Facebook page that I post on pretty much every day. So those are the easiest ways.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to continuing this conversation at another time. In the interim, I wish you well on your own sacred path. You're listening to Slow Medicine Radio, again here every Monday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time. This week at Sunraven, we have a couples program called An Evening of Intimacy for Couples. That's on Thursday. And on Sunday, we have a special event on the subject of beekeeping. So go to slowmedicine.org and check us out. Otherwise, we'll be back next week.
With world and national news, here is the latest update.